Amelia sighed where she was as she tried her best to fix breakfast for her husband before he got downstairs. She tapped her leg repeatedly, hoping that the way she was boiling would boil as soon as possible before Josh got down. She knew that if she weren't done with his breakfast by the time he got downstairs, things would go downhill for her, and she didn't want that again that early morning. It had been 2 years since Amelia and Josh got married, and there had not been a trace of love in their marriage for at least a day. Although Amelia wished that Josh would lovingly look at her, it was a different story entirely for Josh. He was like his father. They cared about the business and didn't have time for love. Before Amelia married Josh, she had a fiancé she loved and wanted to marry, but she had to end her relationship with James, her ex-fiancé, to save her father's company, which was going bankrupt. Josh's family company was much more influential and bigger than Amelia's father's, so Josh's company was the best option for Amelia's father to go into contract with when a crisis arose for them. However, Amelia's father had tried to negotiate with Josh's father, and Dylan, Josh's father, was adamant that he didn't want something that would not be profitable for him. When Dylan heard that Fred, Amelia's father, had a beautiful daughter, he decided that would be the best time to find a bride for his playboy son. He didn't care about love or relationship. He decided to base his son's marriage on business, and Josh also couldn't care less. He was good to go, as long as he could occasionally get free ladies to sleep with. Though Fred tried to oppose the marriage, Amelia decided to succumb to save her father's company. She believed that she could make Josh fall in love with her and that things would be good again, but she didn't know that was just her fantasy. However, she had to do it to save her father's longtime dream. That was how Amelia and Josh got married, and ever since then, things had not been good for Amelia. She tried her best to make her marriage work, but little did she know that it was just the beginning of her suffering. Josh would always maltreat her, and anytime she tried to voice out, he would threaten her with the relationship she once had with James. Amelia tried seduction on Josh, and she was so happy when it worked the night she tried it. She thought she would finally enjoy her marriage until realization dawned on her the next day. Josh was just attracted to her beauty and body, which was another reason he agreed to marry her. He was in love with the idea of having a woman that would constantly be ready to satisfy his sexual urges, and not her soul, like Amelia had hoped. She had been constantly abused, verbally, mentally, and physically by Josh, but she had to take it all in just to save her father's company. It was written in the contract between the two families that they must be married for at least 5 years before considering divorce. Amelia tried to hold out as long as she could, but Josh wasn't making that easy for her. "Are you done with the breakfast? I'm famished," a feminine voice said from behind as Amelia quickly snapped out of her daze and completed the breakfast she was preparing. One of Josh's whores just asked for breakfast from her. There was nothing she could do but succumb. Doing otherwise would only cause problems for her, and she didn't want that again. "It's almost done. Just give me a minute," she said as she rushed to complete the set that she was making. "Seriously? Why are you so slow? You should have known that I'd be famished with how rough I played with Josh all through the night. Are you jealous of me, perhaps?" the lady said, while Amelia just kept quiet where she was. She wanted to reply to the whore who was taking her place in her bedroom as she was left to sleep in the guest room, but she couldn't. As she saw Josh descending the stairs, she just had to swallow her comment. "Can't you reply to her? Why are you delaying the breakfast for us?" Josh's thick voice said as he walked into the dining room while giving the other lady an intense kiss on her lips in the presence of his wife. "I'm sorry, the food is done," Amelia said quietly as a tear rolled down her face. Though that wasn't the first time Josh would do something like that in her presence, it still got to her. The first time, every time he kissed another woman in her face. She was supposed to feel her husband's warmth and kiss, but Josh was freely giving them to other women, depriving her of everything. Without wanting to witness that anymore, Amelia quickly made her way out of the kitchen in tears and ran to her room. She wished she could do something about her marriage. She wished she could go back to her first love. She wanted everything that would be expected of her father's company without needing Josh's company's support so that things could go back for her the way they were. What is taking you so long? Why are you wasting my time? I'm supposed to be at the event in the next 10 minutes. So get your ass down here right now, Josh screamed at Amelia for her to hurry up. They were on their way to an event, and it was a must for them to appear as a couple. Josh was already done dressing, but had no choice but to wait for Amanda to emerge as the perfect couple to the paparazzi. I'm done. I'm so sorry for keeping you waiting. Amelia apologized as she made her way majestically down the stairs to join her husband. She was a wonderful woman who deserved much more than Josh, and how she dressed that day brought out that fact all the more. Well, at least you look okay, Josh hissed as he made his way outside while Amelia followed after him. When they got to the event, they did their best, which was pretense. They were so good at pretending to be the perfect couple and did precisely that. As Amelia wished, the moment would last longer for her, but that was all her fantasies again. Josh disappeared swiftly just a few minutes after the whole pretense in front of the camera. At the same time, Amelia took the opportunity to greet her parents. They were also present at the event. On getting to where her parents were, she was shocked when she saw they had come along with James. Seeing him brought back the sweet memories she had missed. James was the perfect example of a lovely boyfriend and fiancé to her. He was everything every lady could ever wish for. Seeing him again brought more pain to Amelia, as she had no choice but to continually notice what she was missing. She tried her best to greet him casually, but she couldn't deny the rush of emotions she was feeling, so she knew she needed an excuse to leave that place at that instant if she wanted to be faithful to her marriage. And she did just that. She took flimsy permission from her parents as she quickly rushed to a corner on the other side of the room. However, on getting to where she rushed, she wished she had just stayed with her parents after seeing her. She saw Josh shoving his tongue down a random girl's throat, and she couldn't help the tears that busted through her. "What the hell are you doing here? Get out and stop ruining the moment for me," Josh screamed at her as Amelia quickly scrambled away from that place, only to run into a hardened chest. "I'm so sorry, I wasn't looking," Amelia apologized as she tried to compose herself while looking up. She looked up only to be more shocked at who she bumped into. It was James, and she didn't need the genius to tell her that he had also just witnessed what had happened. "James, it's not what you think," Amelia tried to explain while James looked at her with disbelief evident on his face. "Really? It's not what I think, Amelia? Why are you putting up with this? Is this how that bastard has been treating you? Did you leave me for a brat like this?" James ranted quietly with anger to avoid being heard by people around them. He was so angry that the woman he so much cherished was being maltreated by a guy who didn't even know her worth. He was so annoyed that the woman he was trying too hard to get back into his life was wasting her life away in another guy's house. "James, calm down. I know you're angry, but there is no turning back for me now. I need to be responsible for my family," Amelia said with tears as she tried to soothe James. "No, you're wrong this time, Amy. There's a way out, and I will surely find it. I will never lose you, especially not to a brat like that," James said with a determination as he stormed off. "Who the hell are you? How dare you barge into my home like that? Do you know who you're harassing right now?" Amelia heard Josh's voice downstairs, so she quickly rushed to see what was happening, and she was confused when she saw what was happening. She got out to see two male cops trying to put cuffs around Josh's wrists like he had committed a devious offense. "What's going on here? Why are there cuffs on my husband's wrists?" Amelia rushed out as she tried to shield Josh from the cops because no matter what, he was still her husband. "He's not your husband. He doesn't deserve to be called your husband," an all-familiar voice said from outside as the agent's owner entered the living room. "James, what is happening?" Amelia asked with disbelief and shock. "James? So this is the idiot you dated? This idiot is putting cuffs around my wrists? Seriously? I should have known you were bad luck when my dad introduced you. I was so stupid to think you were beautiful," Josh said bitterly as he was being dragged away by the cops. But James and Amelia didn't even give him any attention as they both looked at each other intently. "James, why are you doing this? What about my father's company?" Amelia asked in a low voice as she felt relieved and confused simultaneously. She was relieved that she was about to be freed from her loveless marriage, but she was also confused about what would happen to her father's company. "Don't worry, Amy. Your father's company is fine. I made sure to settle that with the lawyer before I came here. I'm so happy to see you again," James said with a smile as the two hugged each other tightly. They missed being in each other's embrace. As they hugged, it was like everything was back in place. James proposed to Amelia that instant as the two planned to get married. At the same time, Josh was punished by the law for abusing a woman. Just like that, everything was back in place again.
Debbie has been on the run for a new job for a while now. She has been staying up from dusk till dawn on her PC, surfing the internet to get first-hand information about any vacancy. Things, no doubt, have been tough for Debbie ever since she lost her loving husband. Debbie's late husband was a military man. He was in the U.S. Army for years. He slightly lost his life in war after his daughter was born. Debbie became a widow and a single mother simultaneously. Her family was the only one she could fall upon, but unfortunately they neglected her after the death of her husband. According to them, they weren't ready to help because they had warned Debbie before the husband's death not to get married to him because of his profession. They didn't want Debbie to get married to a soldier because, in their opinion, soldiers are liable to die young. So, for this reason, they all deserted Debbie for being disobedient and following her wish only. Debbie had to cater to herself and her new baby girl. In this quest, she enrolled in 2 part-time jobs. She did one from dusk till noon and resumed the other from afternoon till dusk. That was the work pattern for Debbie for years. That was how she could provide the basic things her kid needed. She was a great mother. Regardless of her tight schedule, she ensured to provide time for her baby girl, Victoria. She dropped her off in the morning and picked her up in the evening. They lived in a mini apartment, and she had a smooth relationship with her immediate neighbors. When Victoria clocked 3, Debbie thought it was wise to enroll her in a nursery school. While she had the bump of Victoria and her husband was still alive, they often talked about how they would raise their kids. Debbie's husband assured her that his kids would get the best treatment any parent would offer, starting from their introductory level to adulthood, irrespective of what it would cost him. And even after her husband's death, Debbie promised to fulfill his promises as that was the least she could do in his respect. After all, that was what he wanted for his kid. Debbie enrolled baby Victoria in the best school in the city. Although expensive, she was ready to bet on it with her life savings. It wasn't too difficult to keep up with it at first, since she had planned well and saved for a day. However, she could only go for a short while. Her savings got exhausted within 2 terms. She was living a big man lifestyle for her kid. She thought of calling it to quit at some point, but her husband's purpose wouldn't let her. She decided that instead of giving her daughter a low-standard education, it would be better to increase her income to balance the high standards she envisaged for Victoria. Fortunately, Debbie was able to secure a job with a big firm. It was more like a contract that was to last for 2 years. It was a big one for her and a breakthrough that came at the best time. To top it all off, she was allowed to work from home. This allowed her to spend more time with her baby girl after school hours than before. Her job wasn't a hectic or tasking one. She was the firm's auditor, and she did her work diligently. Most of their meetings and conferences took place on Zoom. This went on till Victoria was 5. She was done with nursery and set for pre-high school education, which would cost much more tuition fees. Debbie's contract had just expired as it was 2 years already. Unfortunately, the firm was not ready to retain her. This had nothing to do with incompetence or unsatisfied service, but strictly the organization's rules. They hire auditors who come highly recommended every 2 years. They preferred to shuffle auditors because of 2 reasons. Their excuses were that they didn't want anyone feeling entitled to their company, a significant reason why they made their auditors work from home. Secondly, they understand the post is big and pays handsomely with just little work. They didn't want a single person to enjoy the benefits of that. Hence, they instead shuffle among certified auditors. The reasons seemed lame to Debbie, but there was nothing she could do about it. They owned their company after all, and were free to do what they deemed best. Before the contract expired, Debbie was able to buy a car with the hope of paying up installments, since she had other things to sort. She was to pay on an agreed date until she could complete the payment and gain full car ownership. Meanwhile, failure to pay the money for each month in 3 consecutive months would result in losing the vehicle. She was back to job hunting. She was back in the labor market. She spoke with a friend who told her about a conceded vacancy at a profound company in town after months of intense job searching. The interview was restricted to recommendations. You won't secure a job with the company if you do not come highly recommended. The company only interviewed prospects and potential employees on weekends, Saturday to be precise. That was weird too, but all of that didn't matter. All she hoped for was to get a job to meet up with her outstanding bills. She had to go with Victoria because it was a weekend, and she didn't want to leave her home alone. When she got to the company, she met up with the interviewer. He looked well-suited and composed. He didn't bother questioning her about her personal life or why she had decided to bring her daughter to her interview. He asked professional questions only. Debbie ensured to give the best response to every statement. She was careful with her words, and she didn't want to be flawed to avoid excuses from the interview for not hiring her. The interviewer asked her why she thought she deserved the position. She went further to explain how she had been able to work with the big firm for 2 years with no negative remarks. The curious interviewer asked her, "If you were as good as you claimed, what was your name again?" "Miss Debbie, sir," she quickly chipped in. "Yes, Miss Debbie, if you were as good as you claimed, why did the previous organization you worked with sack you?" She smiled and managed to explain the nature of the work as it was based on a contract after a brief detailed explanation. The interviewer nodded in satisfaction. He looked impressed. However, he told Debbie he wished he could help, but the position vacant was not for an auditor, which was Debbie's specialization, and he was sorry that the company would not be able to employ her. Debbie tried convincing him to change his mind. She explained how desperate she needed the job. She pointed at Victoria, sitting innocently playing with toys. She promised to take some personal and virtual classes and even seminars to understand what she needed to do. She assumed she was going to work twice as much as she worked for her previous company. The interviewer told her he understood how Debbie felt more than Debbie had pointed out. He told her that his boss, the company's owner, had given them a stern warning not to hire or employ an amateur in a critical position. He said that he would try as much as possible to help Debbie by linking her up with his aunt, who owned a company that needed an auditor, and hopefully she would get the job. He told Debbie to drop her contact, and should there be a development, after informing his aunt if she agrees to fix up an appointment, he will put a call through to Debbie. Debbie thanked him for being thoughtful to help, for his compassion, even though he didn't know her from Adam. She called out to Victoria as they made their way out of the interviewer's office. The interviewer waved at Victoria, and she waved back with a bright smile. "What a beautiful kid," the interviewer commented. As they left, they approached where Debbie had parked her car. Surprisingly, she saw a young man trying to lock her car tires. She anxiously questioned the young man's act. The man ignored her questions and instead replied to her with another question. "Aren't you Miss Debbie Pax?" Debbie's eyebrows raised a bit after hearing this. "This person must know me," she thought within herself as she managed to answer the question. The man introduced himself as a worker from the company where Debbie got her car with the agreement to pay on installment. He claimed that he had been directed to forelock the car, as Debbie had refused to pay her installment for 3 consecutive months, which was the company's rule that she signed and agreed to. Debbie tried pleading with the young man, but he explained that his hands were tied as he was only deployed for a purpose he had to do. While at that, Victoria sighted a wallet that was some meters away. She tapped her mom to inform her, but Debbie was engrossed in what the young man was doing to his car and didn't concentrate on Victoria. Victoria walked down to where the wallet was lying and picked it up. Miraculously, She found well-stacked cash notes in the wallet. She took it and ran back to her mom to show her what she had just seen. The young man had left. Debbie was shocked at the money Victoria had found in the wallet. She counted it, and it was around $5,000. Victoria asked if that was enough to repossess her car, and she answered yes. Victoria advised that she pay them and get her car back. Debbie, however, lectured that taking someone else's property, regardless of how big or small, shouldn't be taken without the person's consent. She assured me that she would not touch the money but return to the company she had just left. Turning back, she found a small piece of paper in the wallet conveying the address and phone number of the wallet's owner. She concluded to call the number and afterward locate the address. She spoke with the man who directed her to the address in the wallet. Debbie headed to the place with Victoria. On getting there, they met a man who seemed to be in his middle 40s. Debbie asked if he was the one he was talking to over the phone, and he confirmed it. While Debbie was about to explain how her young girl came across the wallet, the man cut her short, introducing himself to her. In his words, he said, "My name is Dan Rock. I am the CEO of the popular The Rock Group of companies." Debbie was wowed. She had always heard about the brand, but never knew what the CEO looked like. At this point, her attention had grown and her curiosity to 100%. Dan Rock continued, "Every year, I do a social experiment, and this is what I do. I dropped my wallet, stacked up with cash in my wallet with an address to reach when eventually found. I have been doing this for the past 15 years, and I'm glad to tell you that you are the first person to call me." At this moment, Debbie was lost for words. All that came out of her mouth were repeated wows as she tried to comprehend the revelation. Dan Rock told Debbie that she had made him believe that there are still great and honest people on Earth. He said to her that the money in the wallet belonged to her, and that wasn't all. He told her the house they were in, which he added in the address in the wallet, was one of his houses, and if Debbie loved it, the house would become hers henceforth. Debbie couldn't believe her ears. She thought it was all a prank and cautioned Dan Rock to stop pulling her leg. But Dan Rock couldn't be more serious, as he told her he was serious. Victoria jumped and hugged Dan Rock as she appreciated him and told him they loved the house. Debbie was teary at this point, and she thanked Dan Rock continuously, as she still found it hard to comprehend what had just happened. Dan Rock instead expressed his gratitude to Debbie for being honest and not being like the rest. He left afterward. While Debbie and Victoria were still thanking God for the marvelous thing he had just done, a strange call came in. It was the interviewer. He called to inform Debbie that he had spoken with his aunt and she would love to meet her. They fixed an appointment for the following week. Debbie was able to secure the job. She repossessed her car alongside, and she was able to enroll her daughter in the school of her choice. Indeed, honesty pays more than wages. It is not something we prepare for because you don't know when it will pave the way for you. The best thing is to learn to be honest naturally and not pretend to be honest. Our honesty can also be tested, just like Debbie's case. The wallet came when she needed help with her car. What could be more tempting? Many would mistake that for God's blessings. Honesty is a great virtue, and everyone should have it. It has a significant role in changing our world and making it more habitable. The question now is, will you be honest like Debbie? You should. It will help our planet. Cordelia's following words were cut short by the slap that resonated across her face. Tears sprung in her eyes, and she bit her lips. "You incompetent fool!" a tall woman with fiery hair hissed as she grabbed Cordelia's shoulders. She shook her, and Cordelia's hands dangled at her sides. "Why did you have to bring your smelly self in here when I was in a meeting with an important client? Who gave you the audacity?" The woman let go of Cordelia and flung her to the floor. Cordelia gasped at the pain that shot through her lower leg. She crouched on the floor, trying to hide the tears rolling down her cheeks. I didn't know, a voice in her head kept saying. It was a voice she could not let out, no matter how hard she tried to speak. The boss stalked towards her, and still seated, Cordelia backed away, her skirt scraping the floor. Tina, why don't you calm down? It's not like her coming into the meeting made a negative impact. Sure, it was awkward at first, but we got the contract signed. A man in the corner of the office said from his armchair. Oh, would you shut your trap, Tony? What do you know? Tina turned to Cordelia again and pulled her up from the ground by her hair. Cordelia's scream rent the air. Shut it! You are fired, got it? Get out of my office and don't you dare return. I don't want to see your slimy and ugly face again, you fool. Please, Cordelia stuttered, tears rolling down her cheeks. Tina's reply to her appeal was another slap across the cheek. How dare you talk to me? Get out of here! Tina shoved the sobbing Cordelia out of her office. Leaning against the outside wall, Cordelia heard her mutter, Good riddance. Sobbing quietly, Cordelia made for walking away. She winced and fell to the floor. Her hand rubbed her ankle, and her tears fell. Jobless and injured, those were the only thoughts in her head. Oh, look who we have here. It's the big crying baby. Did Tina let you go? Someone asked, causing Cordelia to raise her head. Her eyes flashed with pain. She was the one that had caused this situation. How could she laugh at her? How could you? Cordelia stuttered through her tears. Whenever she was emotionally stressed, it was unfortunate that she stuttered. Oh, shut up. Do you honestly think you are befitting to be Tina's assistant? I mean, you were so dumb to fall for my lie. I told you she needed you, and you instantly went to her office. A fool like you deserve nothing good. Cordelia's colleague, Kelly, said as she flipped her hair. Do you mind position? Cordelia cried. Oh, don't be a naive fool. Do you think I did this because I covet your position? I fooled you because I simply cannot stand you. Enjoy your jobless life, you idiot. Kelly kicked Cordelia's hurt ankle as she shoved past her, and Cordelia cried. She managed to take in deep breaths after a few minutes, and she stood up. It did not take Cordelia long to pack her few belongings into a box. She sobbed harder as she held her favorite mug, her last present from her mother before she died. It's going to be fine, she whispered as she limped out of the building. Cordelia spared one last look at the building before she started down the sidewalk. Someone pushed her, and the box fell in her hands. Watch where you're going, bitch! The person shouted. Cordelia gasped and fell to her knees. She pulled out the broken shards of her favorite mug, and her lips trembled from unshed tears. Why, she whispered. Why? Are you coming or what? A voice called to Cordelia after what seemed like hours to her. The bus heading to her part of the city was in front of her. The driver, a friendly man called Pete, was waving. She scrambled to her feet and winced. Bedraggled, Cordelia made her way into the bus. Her sadness blinded her as she did not see the person waving at her until a hand grabbed her. Please don't hurt me, she cried, her eyes shut. Cordelia? What happened to you? A familiar voice asked. Cordelia's eyes flew open, and she saw her only friend in the world, Bree. They had followed the same bus circuit for a long time and had become close. Hi, Bree, she whispered. I can't believe all that happened to you in one day. Indeed, when it rains, it pours. So what will you do now? You needed that job, Bree told Cordelia minutes after sharing her story. Cordelia's head fell. I guess we will have to survive on Kyle's salary until I get another job. I'm sure Kyle will understand. He will. Bree rolled her eyes. That guy mistreated you when you were jobless, and when you got a job, he will never let you keep a dime. What makes you think he'll be understanding this time? Because he loves me, Bree. He does, Cordelia said softly. You are so naive, Cordelia. A man who loves you will not treat you like shit. I have told you several times to leave him. You've been facing bullying at that job for so long, and even when you returned home with scars, he never inquired why. Is that a man that loves you? Everyone can see he does not love you. You are the only one who thinks he does. He loves me, Cordelia whispered. Bree shook her head. My daily dose of advice is over. Take care of yourself, Cordelia. Thanks, Bree, Cordelia muttered. We will go have some coffee and cake, my treat. I won't let you go home feeling blue. Thanks, Bree. Cordelia smiled a little. Alongside Bree, Cordelia trudged to the apartment building where she lived. Across the street, she saw an older woman pushing a cart. Don't do it, Cordelia. Come on. Money was tight before, and it's going to be super tight from now on. Bree hissed under her breath. I have to help. She is in a worse situation than me. I have to, Cordelia told her friend as she hurried to the homeless woman. She returned with a smile, and Bree grabbed her arm. How much did you give her? Cordelia stuttered. 20. Oh, for crying out loud! You are too kind and helpful for your own good, Cordelia. Struggling people like you and I cannot afford to be all giving and kind. How many times do I have to tell you that? I don't have to be swimming in money to help those who need my help, Bree. Cordelia smiled at her friend. Bree sighed and shook her head. I can only hope that your kind heart will help you, but then I think of the fact that you are still with Kyle, and I doubt it will. It is that kindness of yours he is taking advantage of. Bye, Bree. Cordelia waved at her friend and hurried into the old building. The moment she entered her apartment, Cordelia knew that something was wrong, but she could hear muffled sounds from the bedroom. Slowly, she followed them. She gasped when she saw clothes strewn at the entrance of the door. Her hands trembled as she reached for the door. Kyle? She stammered as tears fell. Entangled in bed with Kyle was Kelly, the woman who had gotten her fired just hours ago. How could you? Cordelia cried. Kyle shrugged and kissed Kelly, who unashamedly lay back in bed. It was about time you found out. You're worthless, Cordelia. I can't keep wasting my time with you. We are done. I deserve better. But I love you, Cordelia wailed. Whatever. He does not love you back. Please leave already. Honey, are the divorce paper readies yet? Oh, yeah. Cordelia, you'll find them on the table in the kitchen. Kyle waved her away. But, Cordelia cried. Kelly groaned and jumped from the bed. She threw a robe and rushed at Cordelia, shoving her to the floor. Get out of here, you dirty pig! Cordelia fell and hit her head on the floor. She groaned and curled into a ball as pain shot through her head and stomach. Oh, just great. This nuisance is bleeding, were the last words she heard before she drifted away. It was her husband's voice. Cordelia woke up in the hospital a week later to find the divorce papers beside her bed. I am sorry, you lost your baby. You were 6 weeks pregnant and, The doctor said that Cordelia had already covered her head while crying silently. She had lost her husband and a baby she had not known she was carrying. She had been longing for a kid for so long. All she wanted to do at that moment was die. Bree had been right. Kyle had done nothing but hurt her. She had been too naive and had let herself be fooled. It's going to be fine, Cordelia. It will be. Bree patted her shoulder. It won't be okay, Cordelia cried. I never catch a break. Just when I get a glimpse of happiness, sadness abounds. Cordelia wailed louder, and all her friend could do was hug her. Hey, stop being a slowpoke and clean that up already, the beefy man hissed at Cordelia. She nodded and shoved the mop faster. As soon as he left, she wiped the sweat off her brow and sighed. She looked around her. It had been 2 months since she started working as a janitor in the office building. Life there was not significantly different from the life she had experienced before. Still, she needed the money. She could do nothing. The insults, the shoves, the assault, she was not strong enough to fight back. Hey, stupid, take out the trash! The beefy man, who was the office manager on the floor she was working on, hissed at her. Cordelia grabbed the garbage can and hurried out of the building. She froze in the alley beside the building where she saw an older man being accosted by 2 men working there. They had knives pointed at him. Cordelia turned around, but then stopped. She was trembling because she was afraid, but she shook her head. She had to help him. She pulled out her phone and quickly dialed 911. Please come now, she whispered. You fucking bitch! She felt the knife's sharpness as it pierced through her just as blood pooled at the front of her shirt. The sounds of sirens surrounded her as she fell into the darkness. You're up! Thank goodness! I'm glad you're okay. Cordelia blinked and tried to sit up. She winced, and a pair of strong arms held her down. You need to rest. Who are you? She asked the tall man with kind eyes who was standing beside her. You saved my life, miss. Thank you. Your friend Bree has told me everything you've been through. Despite it all, you stuck your neck out for me. No, it's okay. The stranger shook his head. I will help you, Cordelia. First, we are getting you a proper apartment, then a good job befitting a good person like you. You are now under my care, and you won't want or cry. It'll be okay. Thank you. Thank you. Cordelia sobbed as Bree hugged and the stranger patted her shoulder. It was Jerome's first day at his new school. He had moved over during the summer break and was looking forward to a fantastic school year. His parents had suffered a nasty divorce, and he had moved to New Orleans with his mother, who had sole custody. He had a lot of expectations for the new year. He was going to make many friends and stop being a nerd. Are you going to be okay? His mother asked as they pulled into the school driveway. For the 100th time, he nodded. McKinney High was more significant than his old school, but it was just a school, right? She kissed him goodbye, and he hurried out of the car without a wave. He rushed towards the trooping students headed into McKinney High. At 15, Jerome was tall and skinny with ginger hair. He was still undergoing puberty and had acne scattered all over his face. He had a tub of sunscreen in his bag and, under his mother's supervision, had put a decent amount on his face before they left the house. He stared around the hallway eagerly and in excitement. He had Googled a lot about his new school, which had twice the size of his old school student body. "Watch where you're going, punk," a chubby girl said, pushing him aside. "Sorry," Jerome quickly apologized as he held on to his school bag. He looked around for a smiling face, but it was the first day of school, and everyone was on and about. And then he spotted a smiling face, a tall guy just like him with ginger hair. How cool was that? Just as Jerome headed for him, something crazy happened. Two big dudes began to punch him. Everyone else ignored what was happening, making their way around the commotion. Jerome hurried over to him. "Hey, stop it!" He waved his lean hands. The two dudes let go of the guy. "Who the hell are you?" the bigger boys said. "You are hurting him," Jerome said, pointing at the boy with blood coming from his nose. "What is going on here?" a slender woman with a stern look asked. "We wonder the same thing, Miss Agatha. We found Jacob beating up this guy," the other guy said, pointing at Jerome. "Who, me?" Jerome said, stunned. "Is that right, Jacob?" Miss Agatha asked Jacob, who sat on the floor. The two bullies looked at Jacob. Jerome's eyes widened when Jacob nodded. "What? He didn't even know any of them. This was his first day in school." "That's not true. They were the ones beating him up," Jerome defended. A few minutes later, he found himself at the principal's office. The principal, Mr. Scott, was a busy man, as he told Jerome. He didn't like to waste his time on frivolous matters. He stared at Jerome disapprovingly. "I didn't do anything, I swear," Jerome defended himself. It was ridiculous that he would bully a kid on the first day. Who would even believe that? "Then who did it?" the principal asked, hands on his waist. "I told you who did it. The two boys did it. I am new here." "Why did you transfer schools? I am thinking about a bad record with violence, huh?" the principal asked with an intense stare. "Why I transferred here is none of your business," Jerome blurted out. He did not want pity from anyone when he told them they had moved here after his parents divorced. "Then I'm going to have to call your mother," the principal said. 20 minutes later, his mother showed up. She was not pleased to learn that her son had gotten into a fight on his first day of school. It was not even break time yet. "Ours is a school of discipline and integrity. If he's to stay here, he has to adhere to the rules of our beloved school," the principal said with a bored expression. "I assure you, Mr. Scott, he's going to behave. Right, Jerome?" his mother said with a stern look. "Right," Jerome said. He was late for his class, and it was just his luck that the door made a loud creak as he got in. All eyes were on him as he looked for an empty seat. He found one closest to him, but when he got there, someone had put a bag on it. He moved to another, and a bag was put on it, and so on. He found himself at the back of the class, which made him strain his eyes to see the board, despite his glasses on. Class ended, and Jerome stood up. At least he tried to, but the chair was glued to his trousers. He struggled to get up, but the class laughed at him. Tears welled in his eyes. It was his first day at school, and it was a tough one. From him being falsely accused to him being now glued to his chair. It wasn't even broken time yet. The week was slow for Jerome, filled with one problem. It seemed like everything was not going on in his favor. Pranks were being played on him in class, and the teachers ignored what was happening. Jackson and Peter, the bullies he had met on his first day, were the masterminds, and nobody did anything to confront them. While Jackson was the mayor's son, Peter's father was a judge, and they were deemed untouchable by the principal and teachers, who chose to turn a blind eye to their harassment of other students. "Don't worry, some new kid is going to come along, and they will ignore you," Jacob said. He had come to apologize to him after his first day. He knew if he hadn't lied, Jackson and Peter would bully him even more. Jerome had been bullied for most of the school year at his previous school. The divorce had worsened as his father had begun to date his principal. Moving here was supposed to be a new beginning, but the bullying had followed him. "Hey, Thread," Jackson said, pushing him against a locker. Jerome looked around. Every time Jackson bullied someone, it was like all the teachers and other students had disappeared. "What's in your bag today?" Jackson said, grabbing Jerome's bag. Peter emptied the bag and took Jerome's lunch and the money his mom had given him. "That's mine," Jerome said quietly. "What did you say?" Jackson asked as he pinched Jerome's cheek. The bullying continued for months, and Jerome reclined into a shell. He barely talked to anyone in school. He didn't speak to his mother at home. He was always afraid because of what Jackson and Peter did to him at school. There was no one to talk to because they would either not believe him or do anything about it. Jerome tried to keep it under the radar. He hid in the restroom during lunchtime. He hid until classes began before he got into class, and hid behind in the class until everyone went home. The duo caught up with his escape plans and found a way to get through and bully him. One morning, a rumor went around the school that test questions had been stolen from the biology teacher's office. Mr. Donald had arrived at school early and found the test questions missing before the person could return them. The school board was investigating the theft. "Whoever committed this act will be expelled. I assure you, we will find you," the principal announced in assembly. The students filed back into the class as instructed. They were to remain in a class while an investigation took place. Jerome hurried to the bathroom stall to ease himself. It was when he was there that he'd heard two familiar voices. "They are going to find out we stole the test," Peter said with a shaky voice. "Shut up, stupid. They are not going to find out," Jackson said. But Peter was scared. "The janitor saw us in the hallway." Jackson scoffed. "He won't say a word. He knows my father will deal with him. Don't worry, I have it all sorted out. No one will believe we stole the results." Of course, they were the ones who stole the result, Jerome thought. He waited in the stall, contemplating if he should tell the principal what he knew, but decided not to. He could get into trouble if he told Mr. Scott. Besides, he didn't want Jackson and Peter to get into trouble. Yes, they bullied him, but he chose to see the good in them. His grandfather used to say, "Bullies are all tough and mighty, even on the outside, but on the inside they are just scared little kids who yearn for love." Even though they had been awful to him, he wasn't going to reveal their secret to anyone. During the second period, the principal and head of security came into the class. "Jerome, come with us," the principal said. "I don't know anything about the stolen tests," Jerome said. The principal and head of security said nothing as they led Jerome to his locker. Jerome gasped as they opened it. Inside was the stolen test results. "I knew you were trouble from the first day I set my eyes on you." "No, I didn't steal it," Jerome said in surprise. His defense fell on deaf ears. Even when he tried to tell the principal what he had heard, he refused to believe him. His mother picked him up. The ride back home was tranquil. She was disappointed in him. He was also disappointed in her for not believing him. He had never stolen. She knew him better than that. "You are grounded for 3 months," his mother said when they got home. He had been suspended while the school board held a disciplinary panel to decide on the appropriate punishment, but Jerome knew the result. He would be expelled. The principal had made it clear he had no future at McKinney High. The following day after his mother went to work, Jerome schemed. He was not going to be the fall guy for Jackson and Peter. They had not only bullied him, but they had also embarrassed him in front of his classmates. It was supposed to be a fun school year, but they had made it into a horrible year with him about to be expelled. No one believed him, or instead they chose not to. It was up to him to prove his innocence. On Saturdays, Peter worked at an ice cream parlor owned by his uncle. Jerome stood by the counter, but had no intentions of ordering. "I know what you did," Jerome said. "I don't know what you're talking about," Peter said. "I know you and Jackson stole the biology test," Jerome said. "That's not true. You don't know what you're saying," Peter defended. "Says who? I have proof of it on my phone. I was in the restroom, and I heard the two of you talking." Jerome smiled as Peter's face went pale. "It wasn't my idea. It was Jackson. His father will send him to boarding school if he doesn't pass his exam. He was the one who stole the teacher's keys during lunchtime. I swear it wasn't me." Jerome had lied. He didn't have any proof on his phone, but with Peter giving Jackson away, Jerome recorded his confession on his phone. The following morning, while the disciplinary committee went on, Jerome appeared. "You are not supposed to be here," the principal snapped when he saw Jerome. "I'm here to exonerate myself," Jerome said before playing the recording. Peter was summoned before the committee, and with the evidence before him, he gave out his accomplice, Jackson, who had no other option but to confess. The following day, Jerome strolled into school with his shoulder held high and a confident smile. His classmates clapped on his back and hailed him for his actions. Jackson and Peter had been suspended, and the school board would no longer tolerate their bullying and bad behavior. Jerome knew he would have a fantastic school year from now on. Zoe got the divorce papers on Monday morning. She was in the middle of doing the laundry when the bell rang and she was served the divorce papers. She sat in the pristine kitchen, staring at the documents, confused. If the papers weren't directly addressed to her, she would have believed it was a case of mistaken identity. Or perhaps this was a prank and a TV production crew would jump out from the hedges. However, this was her reality, a confusing reality. Bruce, her husband of 15 years, was divorcing her. Just this morning, she had set out his clothes for work, made breakfast for him, and carried his bag to the car, waving him goodbye before returning to the house to start the house chores. Her friend Nancy hurried over, and she burst into tears, shoving the papers at her. "This has got to be a joke, right?" Otherwise, why on earth would her husband divorce her? It just didn't make sense. "Have there been any problems? Have you guys been fighting?" Nancy asked. They had never raised their voices against each other in all the years they were married. Sure, their marriage was not the same as it had been when they married. There was some distance between them, and they were not as intimate as they used to be. Still, a divorce? Just last week, she suggested they go on a vacation, and he gave her the go-ahead to find exotic places. "Have you spoken to him?" Nancy asked. "His secretary says he's busy every time I call," Zoe said. All day, Zoe was not herself. She was in a blank state, staring at the walls, over and over. She tried to think about what had gone wrong in their marriage. She was a good and obedient wife. She stayed home, tendering to the house, while Bruce provided for the family. Bruce came home late. She was asleep, but she hurried out of bed. "What's going on, Bruce?" she asked, waving the papers. She stared at him, hoping he would apologize and tell her it was a mistake. "It is what it is. I want a divorce," he said, reaching for a bottle of scotch. She shook her head in disbelief. "No, no, no! You can't do this, Bruce, please! What have I done wrong? Please tell me! I will change! I will!" "You have done nothing wrong. It's just... I'm tired, Zoe. I need more from a wife," Bruce said. She stared at him, confused. What did he mean? "I need a wife who's not as boring as you are. A wife who goes out there to work. A good-looking wife. A wife I can show to the world." She staggered at his words. You told me to quit my job." 10 years ago, she quit her job as a lawyer to be his wife. It had been a great sacrifice, but Bruce convinced her that being a traditional wife was suitable for their marriage. "Well, I changed my mind," Bruce said. "I will get a job. I know I've been out of work, but I don't want to be married to you anymore. I'm sorry, Zoe, but that is it. You have to admit it. This marriage is headed for the storms. We are no longer compatible." Zoe screamed. A scream filled with the pain that overwhelmed her, and then she broke down right on the floor, her heart ripped into two. The next few weeks were tough for Zoe. Bruce moved out of the house, advising her to get a lawyer. Every attempt by her to reach out to him for recognition was abortive. Their mutual friends she called to intervene had nothing to say, but extended their pity to her. "You need to get a lawyer, fast," as she read through the latest summons delivered by Bruce's lawyers, Nancy said. She had gone through them and couldn't believe it. Since they had no children, he was leaving her with nothing. He was even taking the house from her. How was she supposed to survive? "I understand that you still love him and want to settle this amicably, but Zoe, he's doing you dirty. After 15 years of being with him, he's offering you nothing? You deserve more than this," Nancy said. Zoe stared away absently. She didn't even know what day it was. She barely ate and moped around the house, trying to come to terms with her reality. It still felt like a cruel joke, and a part of her hoped that Bruce would return home with an apology. "Zoe, I'm worried about you," Nancy said with concern. Zoe didn't get a lawyer. She missed out on the meetings with Bruce and his lawyers. The blinds were drawn closed as she sat indoors in the house, wrapped in the overbearing pain that enveloped her. 15 good years she had dedicated herself to her marriage with Bruce. Court summons came in the following week. She would be held in contempt of the court if she didn't appear at the next hearing date. She would not only lose her marriage, she could also go to jail. "Mr. Bruce is not here," the secretary said when Zoe showed up the following day at his office. "Where did he go?" Zoe asked. Bruce was a hard worker and spent most of his time at the office when he was not home. He worked at a renowned real estate firm in the city, and his clientele comprised politicians, prosperous businessmen, and women. "I cannot disclose that to you," the secretary said. "But I am his wife," Zoe defended. The woman had always been polite, but treated her coldly with what was happening. "Have a lovely day, ma'am," the secretary said. "Ma'am, you cannot go in there. Ma'am!" Zoe hurried past the reception. She refused to believe the woman. Having spotted Bruce's car at the front, she was headed straight to his office when she heard voices of excitement in the conference room. There was a little gathering, with Bruce the center of attraction. Everyone had filled wine glasses in their hands. "Bruce?" she called out in a tiny voice. Bruce was surprised to see her there, and so were his colleagues, who had, over the years, become her friends. She had invited them to her home for dinner in the past years. "Zoe, what are you doing here?" Bruce asked as he pulled away from a blonde woman. Charity was her name, as she had been a guest at their home. Her eyes rested on Charity's pregnancy bump. "What's going on here?" Zoe asked. "You are not supposed to be here," Bruce said. "What's going on here?" her voice raised. "We were going to tell you eventually," Charity said, placing her hand over her bump. "Bruce and I are having a baby." For the next few seconds, she heard nothing, not the honks of the car below in the streets, not the clacking of keyboards coming from the next room. Not even her heart was beating. A tear slid down her eyes as she stared at the man she loved with all of her heart. "You said you didn't want children. You... After a year of marriage, she had suggested they start trying to have kids, and Bruce had sat her down and told her he didn't want children. He told her children were very dedicated and would rather they enjoy their lives without the extra baggage. It was a tough pill to swallow. She had always wanted to be a mother. While dating, she would tell him she wanted 3 children, and he would smile. He had told her she could leave if she wished to be different, but how could she have left him? They had a scare a year later, and he held her hand while the doctors tied her fallopian tubes. How could he be so cruel? "I'm sorry, Zoe, but it just happened. She wants to keep the child." "And you? What do you want?" Zoe asked as tears streamed down her face. "I want to be a father," Bruce said. Zoe yelled, flinging herself at him in rage. How could he have done this to her? She was pulled back by one of his colleagues, whom she lashed at. They had all known what was happening, but had kept it a secret. "How long has this been going on? How long?" she yelled. You need to calm down, Miriam, his colleague, said. She glared at the woman, glared at all of them. How stupid she had been to expect loyalty for them. She had catered for Miriam's birthday just last year. She had been with Hakeem in the hospital a few months ago when he had kidney surgery. She had been there for everyone, but in her moment of tribulation, they took sides with her husband, abandoning her. Don't freaking tell me to calm down! How long has this been going on? She yelled. About 2 years, Bruce said. We were having issues, and she walked away from him and every one of them. For 2 years, he had been unfaithful. He had kept all of this a secret for 2 years, and he had been aided by those she considered family. Zoe had no idea how she got home. Immediately after getting home, she settled on a couch and searched through the contacts on her phone. It had been years since she last spoke to Dan, but what she knew to this day was that he was a good divorce lawyer, and with her whole life falling apart, she needed him. It was a tense meeting a couple of weeks later when Zoe met with Bruce and his lawyers. She had almost not made the meeting. She had stared at herself in the mirror, staring at herself in fear. She had been unwilling to let go of Bruce for a while, but now was the time. He had moved on, and so would she. It's going to be okay, Dan, her lawyer, assured her. They had been in constant communication since she reached out to him. He was excited to reunite with her and had been very pissed to listen to her tell him about what was happening. He promised to take Bruce to the cleaners, ensuring he paid for what he did. Bruce glared at her as they walked into the room. Dan had been going back and forth with Bruce's lawyer, giving her updates on what was happening. At first, she was afraid of what Dan was asking for, the house and half of his net worth. It seemed ridiculous, but Dan assured her that things would be in their favor. If we don't reach an agreement, we will be going to trial, Dan said. She was worried about this, but Dan also assured her. I didn't think you were a gold digger, Bruce spat out. Dan flared up. Zoe held him back, sensing his anger. She stared at her husband. How much she had loved him, wasting 15 years of her life. I forgive you, Zoe said. It was easy saying those words. Months ago, she hated him passionately, but she had grown in these past months. She had started working out at the gym, reunited with her old friends, and even started working on the plan for a catering and event planning business. So, are you ready to give me what I want? Zoe asked. Dan scribbled his signature on the document, and Zoe smiled. She had a long way to go, but she would not give up on loving herself.